Hello, folks. My name is Timothy Adon, composer and sound designer. Welcome back to another episode of Integrating Wwise into Unreal. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about integrating volume sliders into your game, something that just about every game should have. A way to control the volume so that any individual person can change how the audio feels for them, even if that means turning off your music. Those of you that might be paying attention, this is in fact a redo of a video that I just did because I decided I didn't like how I stumbled over my own words in the first version. So we'll just get that out of the way right now. As I mentioned, we are going to be creating volume sliders, volume control sliders in Unreal, and we're going to start off in Wwise. And in Wwise, we're going to need two things. You probably will have already guessed, if you've been paying attention to my earlier videos, what we're going to be using for one of those things. One of those things is going to be RTPCs. And for that, we need game parameters. So you will want to create a game parameter for every slider that you're going to create. So in my case, I have a master control for all of the volumes. I have dialogue volume, music volume, and sound effects volume. So in this case, I have the dialogue vol slider, which is the only one that I named in that way, master volume, music volume, and sound effects volume. And I'm sorry if you're hearing something in the background. One, I've got neighbors who are playing music, but also my cats are going a little crazy right now. So sound effects volume, music volume, master volume, dialogue vol slider. One thing to note about the slider widgets in Unreal is that their value is a float that goes from 0 to 1. For those of you that have not been doing programming for very long, a float is essentially a decimal point number, as opposed to integers, which are always whole numbers. Floats are a decimal point number, or numbers that involve a decimal point. So that means that the Unreal sliders can go from 0.0 to 0.1 to 0.2, etc., etc. Think of it as a percentage, I guess. So it could be like 0.33. And so that means that when you set up your game parameters, you want to make sure that the values that you set for your minimum, maximum, and default reflect that. So if the slider's minimum is 0 and the slider's maximum is 1, you want the game parameters to have that as well. I set my default to 0.6, thinking that a starting volume of 60% kind of makes sense to me, but you can change that however you want. My suggestion would be to not start it too close to the max or too close to the minimum, because you want the player to have as much control over the volume as possible, because if they think that something is too loud or too quiet, they need to have the space to fix that. So once you have your game parameter set up, there's one other thing that we're going to need, and that is a bus for each of these game parameters. So in this case, master audio bus, that's already the master volume. But I've also got a dialogue bus, a music bus, and a sound effects bus. I've got a couple extra buses here that I'm probably going to get rid of because I don't need them. And then the rest of these buses are for effects. So on each of these buses that you want to have controlled by the volume sliders, you're going to create an RTPC. I created just a nice even straight line from 0 volume to what I figured is appropriate for a maximum volume for this, going from 0 to 1. Something that I've kind of thought about but have not tried playing around with is putting an exponential curve on the top and bottom of the volume curve. But, you know, that's kind of a put in salt to taste kind of thing. You know, do what you want, whatever you think is going to feel nice. And once you have that all set, the only other things that you need to make sure you do is make sure that your buses are put into your sound bank. Otherwise, they won't work. And the other thing you want to make sure you do, otherwise it won't work, is to make sure that your Wwise items are being routed to the correct bus. Otherwise, the volume's not going to be edited correctly. So make sure your sound effects are in the sound effect bus, and make sure your music is in the music bus, and etc. So once you have that all set, we can go ahead and move on over to Unreal. Okay, so now that we are in Unreal, I am going to show you how it is that this works in my game right now and explain a little bit on how I did it, why, and then once I've gone through all of the blueprints and stuff, maybe suggest ways to do it differently. Since I've already put all of mine together, I'm just going to leave it the way it is, but it's probably way easier to do it in a different way, at least for part of it, and you'll see why in a second. So let me get into the example and I'll start explaining things once we get in there. As a note, the frame rate for the game is probably going to be very low because my computer seems to have trouble playing the game in a standalone window while I'm recording the video. Alright, give me one moment to lower the volume here. Alright, see that? Live demonstration. So now that it's easier to hear me, in my menu, I go to Options. I can click on Options in order to get to my main menu. And in here, I have a difficulty button, which currently does nothing. My master volume slider, my music volume slider, my sound effects volume slider, and my dialogue volume slider. And then a button that goes back to the menu. So, how I have this working is when the slider is changed, the volume of the audio changes with it. So now I have it completely muted. The problem that I ran into, and the thing that I'm going to explain like a different possible solution for, specifically for my game, is I didn't have a good way of transferring all of this information to the pause menu that I have when the game actually starts. Now, that's not to say that the volume would immediately change back. No, that's not what it was at all. The volume would stay exactly the same. The issue I was having was if I open up the pause menu, the widgets would be completely different because it is a separate pause menu. I have the game start menu, which is what this is here, and then an exact duplicate of this specifically for the pause menu, which I'll show you in just a second. So you'll notice no volume because I have it muted. There's the gun, fire some shots, and then I hit escape. This is why I'm doing this in this standalone window, by the way. Hit escape, pauses the game, brings up a menu. Now, it looks exactly like the menu I just showed you before, but it's actually a completely separate menu widget. That is an exact duplicate of the first one. And the reason I did that is because I like making things more difficult for myself. It's actually because I didn't work a good way in my head of transferring the information from one of making it work so that it didn't like quit the game or something like that. I don't remember what my original reasoning was, but you'll notice that the slider still shows the volume as being muted, despite the fact that it's a completely separate widget. And I'm going to show you how to do that too, but I'm going to tell you of what I think might be an easier way to get this to work. Since I've already got my menu set up, I'm not worried about doing that in my game, but maybe you'll be able to do it for yours. But you'll see that I can turn this up. Actually, that's very interesting. See, now I'm going to have to look at this, because now it's being a lot louder than it was before. Huh. Okay, well, anyways, it was working yesterday when I was looking at this. That's programming for you. But anyways, let's just turn this a touch up. Right there. And then, look, I can go. The volume works. And I can quit. So that's what we're going for. We're going for the capacity to change the volume, and of course I could have showed you like the sound effects and music volume too, but I was being completely dumb. And you might have also noticed that when I turned the volume on, that the announcer dialogue was going, and I think there's something up about having the volume muted, as in it seems to not trigger the audio when you have the volume muted. So that's something I'm going to have to look into. But at least for now, it works aside from that one portion. So to get this set up, you need a blueprint widget, which I called main menu in this case. And other things that you're going to need to future-proof is a game instance. And then I've got my pause menu widget, which is a duplicate. So here's the widget. It is comprised of 2 vertical boxes. There's the menu buttons box and the options buttons box. And within each of these vertical boxes are the buttons. So the menu buttons box has my start, which is fight for freedom, options, and quit. And then the options box, vertical box, has my difficulty button, each of my sliders, and a back button. And the reason I have all of these contained within vertical boxes is, one, it actually keeps it really nice and tidy, which is very handy if you need to move things around. And then second, it makes it easy to show and hide each of the groups of UI elements. The only extra step that you're going to need here, once you have all of these things... Oh, actually, hold on. Before I go too far. The menu sliders, because these are very important. Notice that under Appearance, there is a value. That is going to come up in the blueprinting in a moment. But in addition, you'll notice that the value determines where the slider nubbin, which is what I call these now, the appearance value determines where the slider nubbin ends up in the slider. You've also got your color right here. I like to have all of my menus look a little different. You can also import images for this, which I will probably do at some point in the future, but for now I'm just using basic colors. And then you've got somewhere, right here, bar thickness, which determines how thick these bars are. The default is really low and makes it just kind of look like a really thin strip, almost like a racing stripe. So I have it set to 40. It makes it look prominent, makes it look good. I did not see a way to change the size or thickness of the nubbin, so we're just kind of stuck with how big that is. So once you have your menu bars put in and your sliders put in, the other thing that's important to do is make sure that your vertical boxes are checked off as a variable, because I believe by default they are not, and that's kind of important for the visibility purposes in the blueprint. So let's go into the blueprint. It doesn't look like a lot, and it really isn't, but the way that I'm going to explain it is probably going to make it way more confusing than it is. So I'm going to go slowly. First off, make sure that all of your objects, especially the vertical boxes, are variables. So here's my menu buttons vertical box. Here's my options buttons vertical box. And then, although it's not wholly necessary, just in case we need it, make sure that you have a variable for each of a floating variable for each of your sliders. So music, master, sound effects, and dialogue. And then similar to what we did in Wwise, make sure that their minimum and maximum values are set to 0 and 1 respectively. And if you want, set their default value to 0.6 as well. There's not really much of a reason to do that though, because we've already got the slider set up that way, and we've already got Wwise set up that way, so it's not entirely necessary. So first things first, this blueprint, when the widget is constructed, I find the pause menu widget, and again, this step won't be necessary if you have just one menu. I'm doing two, which is why this becomes confusing. I find my pause menu widget by doing a get all widgets of class, because that's the easiest way for me to do that. And then for each, of which there's only one, for each of the widgets found, I create or set a variable, which is just pull off of this thing and hit promote to variable. That way, this pause menu widget right here is a variable. And we really only need this in one place. And again, we don't need to do this if you only have one menu. This is just because of the dumb way that I decided to do it. Not dumb. It's actually really cool how it works, and I'm really excited that I got it to work. But I think it was the roundabout way of doing it. But, you know, I like things to be cool, not easy. And so I have a variable created, and you'll see how that works. You'll see why I did that in a second. We have the quit game button. We have the start game button, which is doing a whole bunch of things because I need it to trigger a bunch of things. And then this is this is where the vertical boxes come into play. So when we click on the big options button, the green one right here, what happens is the menu button's vertical box gets set to hidden, and then the options button's vertical box gets set to visible, which then hides these big three buttons and then makes the sliders and these other buttons visible. And then similarly, when you hit the back button, it does the reverse. That's why the vertical buttons are cool, or the vertical boxes are cool, because that means that we can just do it with very short strings of blueprint without having to have a turn off the visibility for each individual item. That would grow tedious. And then here's the meat of it. So starting at the top, these are actually all duplicates, just each for the different menu sliders. So master volume, music volume, sound effects volume, and dialogue volume. So we're just going to do just master volume because they're all the same otherwise. So first, every slider has a on value changed event. So this means that when the slider gets moved at all, and for every time the value of the slider position changes, so like if like the value under the appearance section here, when this nubbin gets moved, this value changes. When this value changes, anytime it changes, it calls this event. So when this event gets called, it sends whatever the new value is, whatever the current value of the nubbin is at. It gets sent out of this event here. So I have it then set the float that I have for that slider, which again, not entirely necessary, but I have it there just in case. And then from there, I have it set the RTPC for that game parameter, master volume. Again, make sure that you have these named according to what the game parameters are named in Wwise. And you know, ignore the rest of this. That's it. If this is all you need, you only have one game level, and you only have one menu, and you're not being like me and using two menus, then this is all you need. You're done. You don't need anything else. The rest of this stuff is kind of extra. And since that's extra, we're actually going to stop right here for 1 second. This next thing is game instance. Now, as I said, these three things are all you need if you only have one menu and you don't have multiple levels. If you do have multiple levels, then you need to make sure you have a way to transfer these values to the next levels. And then if we're talking about saving the game and then quitting the game, that's an entirely different ball game, and I will talk about that in a future video. I have not figured that out yet. But when it comes to going from level to level, what you need is a game instance. And a game instance is a blueprint object. It's a blueprint class that will store your variables from one level to another. So in this case, I have anything that I feel I'm going to need from one level to another: approval rating, all of my volumes, all of my volume related items. So let's talk about setting up the game instance. It's a blueprint class. So let's just go create a new blueprint class. Game instance. Game instance, right there. You click on that, it'll create a game instance for you. I don't need another one though, so I'm not going to do that. So my game instance. And then similarly, once you have your game instance put together, you want to go under project settings, go under maps and modes, and then scroll down to the bottom and make sure you have your new game instance selected under game instance. That way it's the default, it gets used for everything. And then open up your game instance and create a variable for everything that you want to store to the next level, or to any level, really. And you're going to notice I have a lot of things related to sliders here. This is, in fact, twice as many variables here than there are in the other, in my actual menu widget. And the reason for this is to make the game consistent on multiple levels. One, to actually make it so that the game volume is consistent from level to level, because who knows what happens when you change levels. And to make the visual aesthetic consistent from level to level. So I have these 4 variables are the same exact ones as I have in my menu widget here. And so these are going to store the volume settings for Wwise. These 4, I just realized something. I didn't need to do this, but I'm going to tell you why I did it anyways. These 4 are to store the values for these values, the appearance value for the slider nubbin specifically. And I realized that I don't actually need these. Here I am, having an epiphany right on video. I don't need these because this value is exactly the same as this value. So I don't actually need these. I'm going to leave these in here for now for explanation purposes, but I'm going to delete them after this video. Yeah, okay. Well, there you go. So you need a value to store your volume information, and that's it. So that you can have that information from level to level, and then your menus, when you open them up in future levels, will look exactly the same. Now that we have the game instance information, we need a way to send the slider values to the game instance. Now, unfortunately, I do not have a second level in my game yet, which means that I can't even test this stuff. But I'm setting it up because I am 99% certain it'll work. So I will, once I do have that working, I'll make a new video so that you can see that. After we set the RTPC value, we get the current game instance. That is actually what the project settings bit was for. Get the current game instance, and we cast to it. and then we set the variable in here for master volume to whatever the slider is now at. And then we also technically set the slider value in there as well, but we don't need that anymore, as I realize. And then, as long as you only have one menu, you're done. For me, I have two menus. I have the main menu, which opens up when the game starts, and then I have the pause menu, which opens up when I hit escape while I'm playing the game. And I don't technically need to do anything with that. If I don't have this, so let's just, hide that. If we pretend that this is all I have, everything will work fine. The only thing that'll bug me is when you open up the pause menu, the slider nubbin will be where the default value is set, not where the volume is actually at, which isn't necessarily a problem. It just means that it's not going to look consistent, because regardless, the volume will be set to whatever it is you set the volume at. That's not going to change, but visually it's going to be obnoxious, is how I'm going to say it. It's visually obnoxious. So in order to make sure that it looks right visually, I have this part. So after setting the values in the game instance, I then use, now remember, this is taking a little while, I'm sorry. Back up here where I created a variable for the pause menu, that is what this variable is. I'm using it so that I can set the master volume slider in the pause menu widget, setting the float variable here to this value, as well as setting the value of the master volume slider widget, so that the slider nubbin is in the spot I want it to be. And now we're done. That is that. The pause menu widget is an exact duplicate of the main menu, but I cut off that last bit because I don't need it. It still sets the game instance, and it still does everything else that I need it to do, except for that last part. And that's that. Again, it's not a lot, but I have to kind of explain my way in circles because of kind of the convoluted fashions that I went about doing this. Now, the solution to how I could have done this, because again, I have two menus, and I probably could have gotten away with just having one. And the possible solution is having it so that when the game starts, well, no, because I needed the music to be playing. Because what needs to happen is, well, essentially, what you need is when you hit escape, you need the game to pause, which is what happens with the pause menu. And when this is opened, the game is paused, which, in my player character blueprint, if you hit escape, the game is paused. We disable inputs, show the mouse cursor, and make sure that the game is actually set to paused. So I guess you could just use the same exact thing. I think the only difference is things like I have my elevator get started here, and I have the announcer talk when I do this. So I think what you would want to do instead is, if you want to do this in one menu, is on-clicked start, and then you have a if statement here. And then from here, you have a Boolean variable that is game started. And so if the game is not started, then we do this, which starts the elevator, gets the voice actor talking, and starts the elevator sounds and everything. And if the game is started, then we just unpause the game. That's probably what makes the most sense. And then you could just have one menu and be done with it. However, that's not how I did it. And that's okay. What I did functions. If it turns out that my game is a kind of a horrible, unoptimized mess, then I will probably go in and fix that. But for now, it works fine. It gets a little stuttery when I'm playing the game and recording videos at the same time. Anyways, I hope that you can make your way through what it was that I talked about today. There are a few things that I still need to go over in later videos, like getting game instances to work fully. But we will talk about that once I actually have another level to go to. If you have any questions on what I did here, please feel free to let me know. I am more than happy to explain myself in YouTube comments or through email if you want to email me. Otherwise, that's it for this video. One more time, if you have questions, comments, concerns, or suggestions for future videos, then please feel free to let me know. I'd be happy to hear from you. If you liked the video, go ahead and do that thing that people do on YouTube, which is hit the like button. Maybe even subscribe if you're feeling extra sassy. And if you love me and what I do and want to support me, then first of all, I love you too, and I wish I can support you. Then you can feel free to buy me some coffees on Ko-Fi or Coffee or however it is that people want to say it. To me, it sounds like Wi-Fi, so I want to say Ko-Fi. But, you know, everybody's a little different. My sister yells at me about that. Feel free to buy me a coffee on Ko-Fi. I sustain myself, like most of my blood is coffee. So that would make me extremely happy. And until next time, I will talk to you later. Bye-bye!